Recent archaeological discoveries in Capernaum have uncovered something absolutely stunning. Evidence that perfectly aligns with the gospel accounts of Jesus' time there, down to the very house where Peter lived. For nearly 2,000 years, this ancient city lay buried beneath layers of history, but now we can walk through the same streets where Jesus taught, see the synagogue where he preached, and understand exactly what made this place so special. The story of Capernaum is exactly what it sounds like, a window into the world that shaped Christianity itself. So before we get into it, take a moment to like the video and subscribe if you haven't already, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Thank you for joining me today. As always, I'd love to hear from you. Let us know where you're watching from and what time it is. It really makes us feel like the global community we really are. So without further ado, let's dive in, shall we? The town that Jesus called home. A small fishing village sits beside the northern shore of the Sea of Galilee. Waves lap against black basalt stones. Fishermen mend their nets in the early morning light. The smell of fresh catch mingles with the scent of bread baking in clay ovens. This place is Capernaum. More than a simple backdrop to ancient stories, this village became the headquarters of a movement that would reshape human history. When Jesus left Nazareth, he chose this town as his base. The Gospel of Matthew calls it his own city. Within these humble streets, surrounded by ordinary people pursuing ordinary lives, the extraordinary unfolded daily. The Sea of Galilee stretches 13 miles north to south, 8 miles at its widest point. Capernaum occupied prime real estate along the northwestern shore. To the west, hills rise toward the upper Galilee. To the east, the lake shimmers in the Mediterranean sunlight. Geography shaped destiny here. The village sat at a crossroads of commerce and culture. Fish from these waters fed communities throughout the region. Traders passed through on ancient routes connecting empires. Customs officials collected taxes at the border between two territories. This was no isolated hamlet. Capernaum hummed with the energy of movement and exchange. Aramaic voices mixed with Greek. Jewish fishermen worked alongside Gentile merchants. Roman authority maintained order over a diverse population. The town's name comes from the Hebrew Kfar Nahum, meaning village of Nahum. Whether this refers to the prophet Nahum or a local figure remains uncertain. What matters more is what happened within its boundaries. Jesus performed more miracles here than anywhere else. He called his first disciples from these shores. He taught with unprecedented authority in the local synagogue. He healed the sick, cast out spirits, and challenged religious conventions. The concentration of divine activity in this single location is remarkable. Other towns witnessed occasional miracles. Capernaum experienced them as part of daily routine. Peter lived here. So did Matthew the tax collector. Andrew, James, and John all called this village home. The core of the 12 apostles came from these fishing families and customs booths. Beyond the famous names, countless others encountered Jesus on these streets. A centurion whose faith surpassed anyone in the region. A paralyzed man lowered through a roof by desperate friends. A woman burning with fever, instantly restored. A synagogue worshiper tormented by darkness, suddenly freed. Each story carries weight. Each miracle demonstrated authority. Each teaching revealed something profound about the kingdom of God. The town's size made this intimacy possible. Archaeological evidence suggests perhaps 1,500 people lived here during the first century. Everyone knew everyone. News spread quickly. When Jesus healed someone, the whole village heard about it before sunset. This proximity created both opportunity and accountability. People couldn't dismiss Jesus as a distant phenomenon. He walked their streets. He accepted dinner invitations. He engaged in debates at their synagogue. His presence was constant, undeniable, impossible to ignore. The Sea of Galilee shaped the rhythm of life. Fishermen worked at night when fish fed near the surface. Morning brought the hauling of nets and the sorting of catch. Women prepared meals. Children played along the shore. Merchants arrived seeking fish to trade. Into this predictable pattern, Jesus inserted the unpredictable. A man who couldn't walk suddenly stood. A teaching session in the synagogue escalated into confrontation with religious authorities. A simple meal with tax collectors sparked scandal. The village existed within larger political realities. Herod Antipas governed Galilee from his capital in Tiberias, just a few miles south. Roman power loomed behind every local authority. taxes flowed upward through multiple layers of collectors and officials. Capernaum sat right at the border between Herod's territory and that of his brother Philip. This made it a customs station, a checkpoint where goods and people were monitored and taxed. Matthew worked at this very post before Jesus called him. The strategic importance of this location cannot be overstated. Capernaum wasn't chosen randomly. Jesus selected a hub where his message could reach the greatest number of people with the least effort. Travelers passed through constantly. What happened in Capernaum didn't stay in Capernaum. Stories spread along trade routes. Witnesses carried accounts to distant communities. The ripple effect of ministry here extended far beyond the village limits. The visible remains today tell a story of continuity and change. A magnificent white limestone synagogue dominates the archaeological site. Beneath it lies the darker basalt foundation of an earlier structure. This lower level dates to the 1st century. This is where Jesus actually taught. Nearby, an octagonal church preserves the memory of another sacred space. Beneath its modern structure lie the remains of Peter's house, transformed by early believers into a place of worship. These stones speak across centuries. They confirm the biblical accounts, they ground the stories in physical reality, they prove that these events happened in real places among real people. Capernaum stands as more than historical curiosity. It represents a pattern that would repeat throughout Christian history. God enters ordinary spaces and transforms them through presence and purpose. A fishing village becomes a launching pad for global mission. The town's story is incomplete without understanding what came before Jesus arrived. To grasp why Capernaum mattered, we must first explore its origins and its place in the complex world of 1st century Galilee. From obscurity to prominence, Capernaum before Christ. Before Jesus ever walked its streets, Capernaum existed as a modest settlement clinging to the northern shore of the Sea of Galilee. Archaeological evidence suggests continuous habitation from at least the 2nd century before the Common Era. The town's Hebrew name, Kfar Nahum, points to ancient roots. Whether Nahum was the prophet who wrote the biblical book or simply a local founder, the name itself speaks to Jewish identity and continuity in this place. Location determined everything. The Via Maris, one of the ancient world's major trade routes, passed nearby. This way of the sea connected Egypt with Damascus and beyond. Caravans carrying goods from Africa to Asia moved through this region regularly. Capernaum sat at a natural stopping point. Travelers needed provisions, animals required rest, merchants sought accommodation. The village economy adapted to serve this constant flow of commerce. But trade alone didn't define the town. Fishing formed the foundation of local prosperity. The Sea of Galilee teemed with life. Multiple species of fish inhabited these waters, supporting not just Capernaum, but a network of villages around the entire lake. Fishermen developed sophisticated techniques over generations. They knew the patterns of the fish. They understood how wind and temperature affected behavior. They worked in cooperative groups, sharing boats and nets and labor. The famous fishing boat discovered in 1986 during a drought reveals much about their craft. This 1st century vessel, preserved in mud for 2,000 years, measured 27 feet long and 7 feet wide. Built from 12 different types of wood, it showed constant repair and reuse of materials. This boat could carry about 15 people or a substantial catch. Multiple crews would work together using seine nets that required coordination between boats. The work was physically demanding and economically uncertain. Agricultural production supplemented fishing. The fertile soil around Capernaum supported grain cultivation. Olive groves and date palms dotted the landscape. Gardens provided vegetables for local consumption and modest trade. The combination of fishing, farming, and strategic location created relative prosperity. Capernaum wasn't wealthy by Roman standards, but neither was it desperately poor. Archaeological evidence shows a range of housing quality, suggesting economic stratification within the community. Jewish identity remained strong despite Gentile presence. The synagogue served as the heart of communal life. Here, people gathered for prayer, study, and discussion. Religious leaders settled disputes. Torah scrolls were read and interpreted. Multiple ritual baths, or mikvaot, have been discovered at Capernaum. These installations allowed for the ritual purification required by Jewish law. Their presence confirms the community's commitment to maintaining religious practice. Yet Capernaum wasn't ethnically uniform. Gentiles lived and worked here too. The border location attracted diverse populations. Greek was spoken alongside Aramaic. Roman soldiers maintained a presence, ensuring tax collection and public order. This mixing created both tension and opportunity. Jewish residents had to navigate daily interactions with those who didn't share their beliefs or customs. Gentile inhabitants lived as minorities in a predominantly Jewish town. The political situation added another layer of complexity. After the death of Herod the Great, his kingdom was divided among his sons. Galilee went to Herod Antipas. The region immediately east of Capernaum went to Philip. This meant Capernaum sat directly on an internal border. Customs officials stationed here collected duties on goods moving between territories. The tax system was elaborate and often oppressive. Multiple layers of collectors each took their portion. Matthew would later work at one of these customs posts. Tax collectors were despised not just for their role, but for their collaboration with foreign powers and their reputation for corruption. They enriched themselves by overcharging and keeping the difference. Roman infrastructure brought both benefits and burdens. Roads improved trade, but also facilitated military movement. Peace and stability came at the cost of occupation and cultural pressure. The Pax Romana meant prosperity for some and exploitation for others. Life in pre-Christian Capernaum followed predictable patterns. Dawn brought fishermen back to shore with their catch. Women ground grain and baked bread. Children helped with household tasks. Merchants set up in the marketplace. Elders gathered to discuss community matters. The synagogue rhythm structured the week. The Sabbath brought rest and worship. Festivals marked the passage of seasons. Religious obligation intertwined with daily routine, shaping identity and community bonds. Housing reflected social status. Wealthy families occupied larger structures with multiple rooms around a central courtyard. Poorer residents crowded into smaller spaces within extended family compounds. Most homes used local basalt stone, dark and durable. Roofs were typically made of wooden beams covered with branches, reeds, and dried mud. This construction proved strong enough for normal use, but could be dismantled when necessary, as one later gospel story would dramatically illustrate. The diet centered on bread, fish, and vegetables. Olive oil provided fat and flavor. Wine was safer than water, which often carried disease. Meat appeared only on special occasions for most families. Cheese and yogurt came from goats and sheep. Disease and disability were common. Life expectancy hovered around 40 years. Infant mortality claimed many children before their 5th birthday. Medical knowledge was limited. People turned to traditional remedies, prayer, and resignation. Into this world of routine and limitation, a new voice would soon emerge. The quiet fishing village would become a stage for demonstrations of power that defied all natural explanation. The ordinary would give way to the extraordinary. But first, a carpenter from Nazareth needed to make a decision. Where would he establish his base? Where would he begin his public ministry? The answer would transform Capernaum forever. The call by the shore. Peter, Andrew, James, and John Morning light spreads across the Sea of Galilee. 2 brothers wade through shallow water, casting a circular net. The weighted edges sink, while the center remains suspended. With practiced motion, they pull the net closed, trapping any fish within. Simon and Andrew work with the efficiency of men who have repeated this action thousands of times. Their father taught them. His father taught him. Fishing runs through their family like the water flows through their nets. A figure approaches along the shore. Jesus has been teaching in the synagogue, but now he seeks something more. He needs collaborators, partners, people willing to leave behind everything familiar. He calls to the brothers, "Come, follow me. I will make you fishers of men." The metaphor is immediate and striking. They understand fishing. They know pursuit, capture, and gathering. But people instead of fish, the kingdom of God instead of the Sea of Galilee, the brothers don't debate. They don't negotiate terms or ask for time to consider. The gospel accounts record immediate response. They left their nets and followed. This moment carries weight beyond simple obedience. Abandoning nets meant abandoning livelihood. These weren't cheap tools easily replaced. A fishing net represented significant investment. Hours of labor went into making and maintaining each one. More than equipment, they left behind economic security. Fishing provided income for their families. It defined their social position. It gave them identity and purpose within the community. Walking away from all this would seem reckless. Yet something in Jesus' invitation compelled immediate action. The authority in his voice, the clarity of his purpose, the undeniable sense that this moment wouldn't come again. A short distance up the shore, another scene unfolds. Two more brothers, James and John, sit in their boat with their father Zebedee. They're mending nets, repairing tiers, and replacing worn sections. This maintenance is constant, necessary work. Jesus calls to them as well, the same invitation, the same promise of a new kind of fishing. Their response mirrors that of Simon and Andrew. They leave immediately, but they leave more than nets. They leave their father in the boat with the hired servants. The presence of hired workers indicates relative prosperity. Zebedee's fishing operation was substantial enough to employ help. James and John weren't desperate men fleeing poverty. They walked away from a successful family business. Zebedee must have watched his sons go. The gospel writers don't record his reaction. Did he protest? Did he understand? Did he feel abandoned or proud or both? The location of these callings matters. The shore of the Sea of Galilee would become the stage for multiple pivotal moments. Jesus taught from boats. He calmed storms on these waters. He walked across them, defying natural law. This specific stretch of coastline near Capernaum witnessed the formation of the inner circle. These four fishermen, called on the same day from the same profession in the same place, would become the foundation of the apostolic community. Their backgrounds prepared them for what came next. Fishing required patience and persistence. Hours might pass without catching anything. Then suddenly the nets would fill. This rhythm taught resilience. Fishing also demanded cooperation. No one worked alone. Multiple boats coordinated their efforts. Success depended on teamwork, communication, and mutual trust. The physical demands of the profession created strong bodies and tough minds. Hauling nets, rowing boats, working through the night, these activities built endurance. These men knew disappointment. They understood risk. They had experienced the gap between effort and reward. Some nights the nets came up empty. Some seasons proved lean. They also knew abundance. When the fish ran, when the nets strained with the weight of the catch, when the boats rode low in the water from the load, these moments revealed the possibility of sudden, overwhelming provision. Jesus would build on all these experiences. He would send them out to fish for people. Sometimes the response would be meager. Sometimes it would exceed all expectation. Always it would require patience, cooperation, and trust. The social implications of this calling extend beyond the four individuals. In a village the size of Capernaum, everyone knew everyone. When four prominent fishermen abandoned their trade, the whole community noticed. Questions would have circulated. What was Jesus offering that could compete with the security of an established livelihood? What authority did he possess that men would follow him so completely? These weren't naive young men seeking adventure. Simon was married. His mother-in-law lived in his household, as later events would reveal. He had responsibilities. He had a home, yet he walked away from the nets. This pattern would repeat throughout Jesus' ministry. He called people away from their ordinary pursuits into extraordinary purpose. Tax collectors, zealots, women who supported the movement from their own resources, all left behind the familiar. The fishermen would witness wonders. They would see Jesus command nature, heal disease, and confront death itself. They would travel throughout the region, carrying his message to other towns and villages. But in this moment, standing on the shore with wet feet and calloused hands, they only knew the call. The rest would unfold day by day, miracle by miracle, teaching by teaching. Capernaum became the base for this newly formed group. They would return here between journeys. They would rest in Peter's house. They would gather in the synagogue. The town absorbed them and adapted to their presence. The shore where they were called remained unchanged. The same stones, the same water, the same fish swimming beneath the surface, yet everything had changed. Four men stepped from one life into another. The ordinary became the launching point for the extraordinary. This stretch of coastline would witness much more. But it began with a simple invitation and an immediate response. Come and follow. Leave the nets behind. Become fishers of men. The house of Peter, unearthing Jesus' own. Base of operations. A short walk from the synagogue, a particular house occupied an unremarkable space in ancient Capernaum. Basalt walls, dark and rough, enclosed several rooms arranged around a central courtyard. The layout was typical for the region and the era. This house belonged to Peter. Here he lived with his wife and his mother-in-law. Here Jesus came not as guest, but as resident. The gospel accounts describe Jesus teaching in this house, healing in this space, and using it as his base of operations. The archaeological evidence for this identification is remarkable. Beneath the modern memorial church, with its distinctive octagonal design, lie the remains of a structure that underwent continuous transformation across centuries. The earliest phase dates to the 1st century. A simple dwelling indistinguishable from dozens of others excavated at the site. Multiple rooms surrounded a courtyard where families would gather for meals, work, and daily life. But something changed in this house soon after Jesus' ministry. The walls of one room were replastered repeatedly. Graffiti appeared on these walls, written in Greek, Aramaic, and other languages. These inscriptions invoke Jesus as Lord, Christ, and Most High. The presence of such graffiti is unusual. Private homes didn't typically feature religious inscriptions. The markings suggest pilgrims visited this specific location, leaving their prayers and devotions on the walls. By the 4th century, the room had been transformed. The walls were reinforced. The floor was covered with plaster. The space was clearly set apart for special purpose, adapted for gathering and worship. This represents one of the earliest house churches in Christian archaeology. Before purpose-built churches became common, believers met in homes. This house in Capernaum became a focal point for such gatherings. The transformation continued in subsequent centuries. By the 5th century, an octagonal church was constructed directly over the venerated room. This architectural choice was significant. Octagonal designs were reserved for commemorative structures built over sacred sites. Similar octagonal churches appeared over the Cave of the Nativity in Bethlehem and the site of Jesus' ascension on the Mount of Olives. The shape itself declared the special status of the location. Pilgrims from across the ancient world traveled to Capernaum specifically to visit this house. Written accounts from travelers describe their journeys to the place where Jesus lived. They speak of the house being transformed into a church, with the walls preserved as they were. One 4th century pilgrim, Agaria, wrote of her visit. She described how the house of Peter had been made into a church, with the original walls still standing. Her account matches what archaeologists later discovered. The Franciscan fathers, who acquired the property in the late 19th century, began systematic excavations in the 20th century. Under the direction of archaeologists Virgilio Corbo and Stanislao Lafreda, the layers were carefully uncovered and documented. What they found confirmed the early Christian tradition. The house wasn't randomly selected for veneration. The evidence of continuous worship, the architectural modifications, the pilgrims' graffiti, all pointed to a genuine historical memory preserved through generations. The size of the house suggests Peter's family had modest means. The rooms are small by modern standards. Multiple families likely shared the larger compound, as was typical in extended family arrangements. The courtyard would have been the center of activity. Here women prepared food, children played, tools and equipment were stored. In warmer months, people would have slept on the roof, where it was cooler. Jesus' healing. Peter's mother-in-law makes sense in this context. She lived in the household, probably helping with domestic duties until fever struck. Jesus' immediate healing of her demonstrated both compassion and power. The house also served as a teaching venue. When crowds couldn't fit inside the synagogue, or when Jesus sought more intimate settings, he taught in Peter's courtyard. People pressed in through the doorway, others listened from outside. The famous story of the paralyzed man being lowered through the roof takes place in this house. The crowd was so thick that his friends couldn't reach the door. So they climbed to the roof, removed the covering of branches and mud, and lowered their friend on his mat directly in front of Jesus. This action wasn't as dramatic as it might sound. Roofs were accessible by external stairs. The construction materials could be temporarily removed and replaced. The friend's determination was bold, but not destructive. Jesus saw their faith and healed the man. But first, he declared the man's sins forgiven, sparking controversy with religious authorities present. This house witnessed not just miracles, but theological confrontations. The intimate scale of the space made such encounters intense. People weren't distant observers in a large building. They stood close enough to see expressions, hear every word, feel the tension when Jesus challenged conventional thinking. Living in this house meant participating in daily miracles. Peter's family watched as Jesus transformed their home into a center of healing and teaching. Their ordinary domestic space became extraordinary through his presence. The archaeological remains allow us to walk in imagination where Peter walked. The basalt stones beneath the modern protective structure are the same stones Peter knew. The layout of rooms, though partially reconstructed, follows the original pattern. The site continues to draw pilgrims and visitors today. The modern memorial church, designed by architect Ildo Aveda and completed in 1990, hovers over the ancient remains on pillars. Glass panels in the floor allow visitors to look down at the venerated house. This design choice reflects a theology of continuity. The past remains visible and accessible. The modern structure doesn't erase history, but frames it, protects it, and points to it. Peter's house in Capernaum stands as a physical link to the gospel narratives. Here, theory and evidence align. Here, text and stone tell the same story. Here, faith finds confirmation in archaeology. The house where Jesus lived wasn't a palace or temple. It was a simple dwelling in a small fishing village. This ordinariness matters. God entered the world through ordinary places, ordinary people, ordinary circumstances. Peter's house represents all this. A fisherman's home became the headquarters of a kingdom that would outlast every earthly empire. The stones remain, still speaking after 2,000 years. A day of miracles, healing, and authority in Capernaum. The Sabbath begins at sunset Friday. By Saturday morning, Capernaum's synagogue fills with worshipers. Men gather in the main hall. Women occupy a separate section. The familiar prayers are recited. Torah scrolls are brought forth. Jesus is present, and he is invited to teach. His reputation has grown. People speak of his wisdom. They debate his interpretations. Today they will hear him directly. He begins to teach, and immediately something is different. The usual rabbinical style involves citing other teachers, building authority through tradition. Jesus cites no one. He speaks with direct certainty. His words carry their own weight. The congregation notices. The contrast with their usual teachers is stark. Those scribes always hedge, always qualify, always defer to previous scholars. Jesus declares truth as one who possesses it himself. Then disruption. A man in the congregation begins shouting he is possessed by an unclean spirit, and the spirit recognizes who Jesus is before the people do. "What do you want with us, Jesus of Nazareth? Have you come to destroy us? I know who you are, the Holy One of God." The synagogue erupts in confusion, but Jesus responds with calm authority. He rebukes the spirit. He commands it to be silent and come out. The man convulses. The spirit throws him to the ground. Then with a shriek, it leaves him. The man lies still for a moment, then rises, completely freed. Amazement ripples through the congregation. Questions fly. What is this? A new teaching, and with authority. He even commands unclean spirits, and they obey him. News of this event spreads through Capernaum immediately. By the time the Sabbath restrictions lift at sunset, everyone knows what happened in the synagogue. After the service, Jesus goes to Peter's house with several disciples. They arrive to find Peter's mother-in-law burning with fever. She lies on a mat, unable to rise, unable to help with the meal preparation. Peter or one of the others mentions her condition to Jesus. He doesn't perform a ritual. He doesn't recite formulas. He simply takes her hand and helps her up. The fever leaves her instantly. The weakness vanishes. She immediately begins serving them, preparing food, acting with the energy of someone who was never sick at all. The healing is complete and immediate. No gradual recovery, no lingering fatigue. One moment she is seriously ill, the next she is healthy and active. Word of this second miracle spreads as quickly as the first. A synagogue exorcism and a private healing in the same day. By sunset, when Sabbath restrictions end and people can travel, a crowd begins to gather. They bring everyone who is sick. People with fevers, with chronic conditions, with paralyzing ailments. They bring those tormented by demons. The street outside Peter's house fills with the suffering and those who love them. Jesus heals them. Not some, not a few. The gospel accounts say he healed many, suggesting an extensive procession of miraculous restorations. Person after person, case after case, he demonstrates power over disease and darkness. The density of miracles in this single day is astonishing. An exorcism in public worship, a private healing in a home, then mass healings as evening falls. Capernaum witnesses concentrated demonstrations of divine authority in rapid succession. The range of conditions healed matters. Fever might be psychosomatic. But Jesus also heals those with physical disabilities, with chronic diseases, with visible conditions that couldn't be faked or imagined away. The demons recognize him. They identify him as the Holy One of God, as the Son of God. Jesus silences them. He refuses to accept testimony from such sources. The truth of his identity must be established through proper means, not through the voices of darkness. The crowds press closer. More people arrive. The need is overwhelming. Everyone in Capernaum seems to have someone who needs healing. Jesus accommodates them, showing compassion alongside power. Yet the Gospel of Mark records that early the next morning, while it is still dark, Jesus withdraws to a solitary place to pray. The crowds would keep coming. The needs wouldn't stop. But he prioritizes communion with the Father. The disciples search for him. When they find him, they say, "Everyone is looking for you." They expect him to return to Capernaum, to continue the healing ministry that had such dramatic success. But Jesus redirects them. "Let us go somewhere else, to the nearby villages, so I can preach there also. That is why I have come." This response reveals his priorities. The healings are important but secondary. The primary mission is proclamation. The miracles authenticate his message but don't replace it. Another miracle in Capernaum involves a paralyzed man and remarkable faith. Jesus is teaching in a house, likely Peter's. The crowd is so dense that no one else can enter. 4 men arrive carrying their paralyzed friend on a mat. Unable to reach Jesus through the door, they climb to the roof. They dig through the mud and branch covering, creating an opening. Then they lower their friend on his mat directly in front of Jesus. The text says, Jesus saw their faith, the faith of the friends who went to such lengths to bring their companion to him. Jesus first addresses the man's spiritual condition. "Son, your sins are forgiven." Religious teachers present are scandalized. Only God can forgive sins. For Jesus to claim this authority is blasphemy unless he is who he implicitly claims to be. Jesus knows their thoughts. He poses a question, which is easier, to say your sins are forgiven or to say get up and walk. Words of spiritual forgiveness can't be verified, but commanding a paralyzed man to walk will immediately prove true or false. To demonstrate his authority to forgive sins, Jesus tells the man to get up, take his mat, and go home. The man does exactly that. He stands, picks up what he was carried in on, and walks out through the amazed crowd. This miracle serves a dual purpose. It relieves physical suffering and proves spiritual authority. The visible healing validates the invisible forgiveness. These accounts from Capernaum show consistent patterns. Jesus heals immediately and completely. He demonstrates authority over both physical and spiritual afflictions. He uses miracles to teach theological truths. He prioritizes relationship with God alongside ministry to people. The concentration of these events in Capernaum is intentional. This town serves as the primary stage for demonstrating who Jesus is and what his kingdom represents. The miracles here are foundational. They establish credibility for everything that follows. The synagogue of Capernaum, where Jesus taught with authority. The white limestone walls rise against the Galilean sky. Columns frame the space where crowds once gathered. This synagogue in Capernaum draws visitors from across the world, but the structure standing today tells only part of the story. Beneath the pale stone lies something older. Black basalt foundations rest in the earth below. These darker stones form the synagogue where Jesus actually stood, where he opened scrolls and taught, where his words stirred both wonder and rage. Archaeologists discovered this truth through careful excavation. The magnificent white synagogue dates to the 4th or 5th century, long after the gospel events, yet its builders chose this exact location deliberately. They constructed their house of worship directly over the earlier foundation. The basalt stones beneath mark the authentic site. Franciscan excavators uncovered the lower level in the 20th century. The black volcanic rock contrasts sharply with the limestone above. These darker stones speak of the 1st century, of Roman occupation and Jewish resistance, of a time when a carpenter's son from Nazareth walked through these very doors. The Gospel of Mark preserves a striking moment. Jesus enters the Capernaum synagogue on the Sabbath. He begins to teach. The congregation sits stunned. His words carry a weight they've never heard before. The text notes he taught as one having authority, not as the scribes. What made his teaching so different? The rabbis of that era built their authority on tradition. They quoted previous teachers. They cited interpretations passed down through generations. Jesus simply spoke. He declared truth directly. He interpreted Scripture with a confidence that both attracted and threatened. Then the confrontation erupts. A man possessed by an unclean spirit cries out. The entity recognizes Jesus, calls him the Holy One of God, commands him to leave them alone. Jesus rebukes the spirit with a single word. The man convulses. The spirit departs. Silence falls over the assembly. The people whisper among themselves, "What is this?" A new teaching with authority. He commands even unclean spirits, and they obey. News about him spreads immediately throughout the surrounding region of Galilee. This pattern repeats in Capernaum's synagogue. Jesus returns on multiple Sabbaths. Each visit brings teaching that challenges conventional understanding. Each appearance stirs controversy among the religious leaders. The building itself reflects typical synagogue architecture of the period. The basalt foundation reveals a rectangular hall. Stone benches line the walls. The congregation sits facing the center. Men gather to hear Torah readings, to pray, to debate the law. The synagogue serves as more than a place of worship. It functions as the community center. The school, the courthouse. Here elders settle disputes. Here boys learn to read Hebrew. Here the town gathers for festivals and fasts. Archaeological evidence shows the original structure measured roughly 20 meters long and 15 wide. Columns supported the roof. Windows allowed light to filter through. The floor was paved with basalt flagstones, simple but solid, functional but dignified. The later Byzantine synagogue above showcases elaborate craftsmanship. Carved decorations adorn the limestone, images of pomegranates and clusters of grapes, geometric patterns, even a carving of the Ark of the Covenant on wheels. The artistry reflects a community with resources and pride, but the earlier basalt structure below would have been plainer, more austere. The focus fell on the words spoken, not the walls containing them, on the scrolls read, not the stones supporting them. Jesus knew this building well. He likely attended here regularly during his Capernaum ministry. The synagogue leader, Jairus, becomes part of the gospel narrative. His daughter falls deathly ill. He begs Jesus to come. The connection between Jesus and the synagogue runs deep through many stories. The conflicts that arise here prove significant. Religious authorities from Jerusalem travel north to observe this teacher. They sit in the Capernaum synagogue, watching, listening, waiting for missteps. The tension builds with each visit. One Sabbath, Jesus heals a man with a withered hand. The Pharisees consider this work, labor on the holy day. They begin plotting against him. The very place meant for encountering God becomes a site of opposition to the one claiming divine authority. The white limestone synagogue standing today offers visitors a tangible connection. They walk where generations worshipped. They touch stones shaped by ancient hands. They imagine the crowds that gathered, the prayers that rose, the hopes that filled this space. Beneath their feet, the black basalt remembers. Those older stones witnessed the actual moment. They supported the walls that echoed with his voice. They formed the floor his sandals crossed. They anchored the building where heaven touched earth in unexpected ways. The synagogue of Capernaum stands as a monument to faith, to continuity, to the enduring human need for sacred space. The white stones honor the memory. The black stones hold the truth. Together they testify to what happened in this village by the sea. The centurion's faith, a Gentile's unexpected belief. A Roman soldier walks the streets of Capernaum. His armor marks him as an outsider, a representative of the occupying power. Yet something unusual defines this particular centurion. The Jewish community respects him. The gospel accounts preserve a remarkable encounter. This officer's servant lies paralyzed at home, suffering terribly. The centurion hears about Jesus, about his power to heal. He sends Jewish elders to make a request on his behalf. These elders approach Jesus with an unusual message. They don't merely tolerate this centurion, they actively advocate for him. They tell Jesus he deserves help. "This Roman loves our nation," they explain. "He built our synagogue." The detail carries weight. Centurions commanded roughly 80 soldiers. They earned decent pay by ancient standards. Yet this man chose to invest his resources in the spiritual life of a conquered people. He funded the construction of a Jewish house of worship. Archaeological evidence suggests this might refer to the very basalt synagogue where Jesus taught. Someone provided the means for its construction. The community remembered the benefactor. In a village of fishermen and farmers, such a donation would have been extraordinary. Jesus agrees to come. He sets out toward the centurion's house, but before he arrives, the soldier sends another message. This second communication reveals something deeper than the first. The centurion objects to Jesus entering his home, not out of prejudice, not from a desire to avoid ritual impurity for Jesus, but from a profound understanding of authority and power. "Lord, I don't deserve to have you come under my roof." The words express humility, recognition of unworthiness. But then comes the stunning reasoning. The centurion explains his logic. "I myself am a man under authority. I have soldiers under me. I tell this one go, and he goes. Another come, and he comes. I say to my servant, do this, and he does it." He grasps something the religious leaders miss. Power doesn't require physical presence. Authority operates through words. A command from the proper source achieves results at a distance. The centurion understands chain of command. He recognizes that Jesus operates under divine authority. Therefore, Jesus need only speak the word, and healing will occur. Jesus stops walking. He turns to the crowd following him. His response carries astonishment. "I tell you, I have not found such great faith even in Israel." The statement lands like thunder. This Gentile soldier, this representative of Rome, this builder of synagogues who remains outside the covenant. This man demonstrates faith exceeding anyone Jesus has encountered among his own people. The implications ripple through the crowd. The kingdom Jesus proclaims welcomes those who trust, regardless of ethnicity, regardless of background. Faith, not lineage, opens the door. Jesus continues with a prophecy. "Many will come from east and west. They will take their places at the feast with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob in the kingdom of heaven. But the subjects of the kingdom will be thrown outside into darkness." The warning addresses those who assume their heritage guarantees them a place, who trust in their identity rather than responding in faith. Meanwhile, outsiders who believe will enter the banquet. Jesus then speaks the word. Just as the centurion requested, "Go. Let it be done just as you believed it would." The messengers return to the house. The servant is found healed, whole, restored at the exact moment Jesus spoke. The story raises questions about the centurion's journey to faith. How did a Roman officer come to respect Judaism so deeply? What drew him to fund a synagogue? How did he develop such insight into spiritual authority? Roman soldiers stationed in Judea and Galilee encountered Jewish monotheism directly. Some found it compelling, the concept of one God, the moral code of the Torah, the community structure of the synagogue. These elements attracted certain Gentiles. The technical term for such individuals was God-fearer. They attended synagogue services, followed some Jewish practices, supported the community, but stopped short of full conversion. The requirements of circumcision and complete law observance proved too demanding. This centurion seems to fit that category. He built their synagogue. He sought help from Jewish elders. He showed sensitivity to Jewish concerns about ritual purity, yet he remained a Roman soldier, serving an empire many Jews despised. His faith emerges from this complex position, caught between two worlds, drawn to Israel's God while serving Caesar, seeking healing through a Jewish teacher while commanding Gentile troops. The tension produces humility, awareness of his position, recognition that he stands outside looking in. Jesus honors that faith, declares it greater than what he finds among those who should know better. The centurion receives what he asked. His servant is healed. His trust is vindicated. The white stones of the synagogue today might stand on foundations this centurion helped fund. Visitors walk through spaces his generosity made possible. His legacy lives in stone and story. A Gentile who saw what many missed. A soldier who understood authority better than the religious experts. A man whose faith still challenges assumptions about who belongs in God's kingdom. The tax collector's booth, Matthew's calling. A customs post stands near the shore. People pass through regularly, fishermen bringing in their catch, merchants transporting goods, travelers moving along the Via Maris. Each transaction triggers a tax. Each payment lines the coffers of Rome and enriches the collector taking his cut. Matthew sits at this booth. Some gospel accounts call him Levi. The names might refer to the same person, or the text preserves both his Hebrew and Greek names. Either way, his profession defines him in the community: tax collector, publican, collaborator. The system operates on a franchise model. Rome auctions off the right to collect taxes in specific regions. Wealthy individuals bid for these contracts. They then hire agents to do the actual collection. These agents pay a fixed amount to the contractor. Everything collected above that amount becomes their profit. This structure creates obvious temptations. Collectors can charge extra. They can assess goods at inflated values. They can demand payments not actually required. The person taxed has little recourse. Roman law backs the collector. Disputing the amount means challenging the empire. Jewish communities particularly despise tax collectors. The occupation combines several offenses. First, it serves Rome, the occupying power, the enemy. Cooperation with the empire equals betrayal of the nation. Second, it requires constant contact with Gentiles. This contact brings ritual impurity. Tax collectors become ceremonially unclean, unable to fully participate in worship, excluded from religious fellowship. Third, the profession assumes dishonesty. Everyone knows collectors overcharge, they extort, they exploit their position. Rabbis group tax collectors with sinners and prostitutes, the most despised members of society. Matthew works this hated job in Capernaum, a border town between territories, a fishing hub where boats come and go, a crossroads where goods move east and west, an ideal location for taxation and for becoming wealthy through exploitation. Jesus walks past the customs house. He sees Matthew at his post, coins on the table, records before him, the machinery of occupation in full operation. Jesus speaks 2 words: follow me. No preamble, no negotiation, no explanation of terms, just the direct call, the immediate invitation, the stark choice. Matthew responds with equal brevity. He gets up, leaves everything, follows Jesus. The decision carries enormous weight. Walking away from the tax booth means abandoning his income, his position, his investment in the franchise. He can't take a sabbatical and return. This choice closes the door permanently. Matthew then does something remarkable. He throws a banquet, a large dinner at his house. He invites Jesus as the guest of honor, and he fills the room with his associates, other tax collectors, known sinners, the outcasts of Capernaum. The Pharisees notice. They question Jesus' disciples. Why does your teacher eat with tax collectors and sinners? The inquiry carries accusation. Sharing a meal implies fellowship, acceptance, approval. A righteous person wouldn't contaminate himself with such company. Jesus overhears the question. His answer becomes famous. Those who are well don't need a physician, the sick do. He hasn't come to call the righteous, but sinners. The response cuts multiple ways. Yes, he associates with tax collectors because they need what he offers, but the statement also implies the Pharisees may not be as healthy as they think. Their self-righteousness blinds them to their own condition. Matthew's calling illustrates Jesus' consistent pattern. He approaches people others avoid. He sees potential where society sees only problems. He calls followers from unexpected places. The fishing disciples made sense. Peter, Andrew, James, and John came from respectable, if modest, backgrounds. They worked honest jobs. They could be explained. Matthew poses a problem. His inclusion in the inner circle raises eyebrows, creates scandal, gives ammunition to critics who already question Jesus' judgment. Yet Jesus doesn't apologize, doesn't explain, doesn't distance himself from the controversial choice. Matthew becomes one of the 12, an apostle. Eventually, tradition credits him with writing the first gospel. The customs booth in Capernaum witnessed a transformation. A man trapped in a despised profession found unexpected freedom. A collaborator became a follower. An outcast joined the inner circle. The location matters. Capernaum's position made it a natural spot for taxation. The town's role as Jesus' base meant this encounter happened in his own community, among people who knew Matthew's reputation, who had paid his taxes, who resented his presence. Jesus calls him anyway, in public, where everyone can see. The statement resonates beyond the individual. The kingdom welcomes those the world rejects. God's grace reaches those religion excludes. Transformation remains possible for anyone. The booth itself probably stood near the shore, close to where boats landed, where fish were counted and assessed, where merchants displayed their goods. The flow of commerce through Capernaum ensured steady business. After Matthew leaves, someone else likely takes over the franchise. The booth continues operating. Taxes still get collected. Rome doesn't pause for one man's conversion, but that one man's choice echoes through centuries. Matthew's story offers hope to those who feel disqualified, to people trapped in compromising situations, to anyone who wonders if their past puts them beyond reach. The tax collector at the booth in Capernaum discovered otherwise. Jesus saw beyond the profession, beyond the reputation, beyond the scandal. 2 words changed everything. Follow me. Matthew did. The booth remained. The man moved on. The bread of life discourse, a theological turning point. The previous day brought a miracle. 5,000 men, plus women and children, ate from 5 loaves and 2 fish. 12 baskets of fragments remained. The crowd's enthusiasm peaked. They wanted to make Jesus king by force. He withdrew to the mountain alone. Now they find him again, across the sea in Capernaum, in his customary teaching place, the synagogue. They followed him, searching, persistent, still thinking about the bread. Jesus confronts their motivation directly. You seek me not because you saw signs, but because you ate the loaves and were filled. The assessment cuts to the heart. They want provision, not revelation. Free food, not truth. He tells them to work not for food that perishes, but for food that endures to eternal life. The Son of Man will give you this food. God the Father has set his seal on him. The crowd asks what they must do to perform the works of God. They want instructions, steps to follow, a program to complete. Jesus gives them something simpler and more difficult. This is the work of God, that you believe in him whom he has sent. They push back. What sign do you do? Our fathers ate manna in the wilderness. The implication hangs clear. Moses gave bread from heaven. What will you do to prove yourself of? Jesus corrects their theology. Moses didn't give you bread from heaven. My Father gives you the true bread from heaven. The bread of God comes down from heaven and gives life to the world. They respond eagerly. Sir, give us this bread always. They still think physically, still imagine something they can touch, taste, store. Then Jesus makes the claim that changes everything. I am the bread of life. Whoever comes to me shall not hunger. Whoever believes in me shall never thirst. The metaphor shifts from provision to identity. He doesn't merely give bread. He is bread, the sustenance they need, the nourishment for something deeper than their stomachs. He continues pressing the point. I am the living bread that came down from heaven. If anyone eats of this bread, he will live forever. And the bread that I will give for the life of the world is my flesh. The Jews dispute among themselves, how can this man give us his flesh to eat? The question reveals their confusion, their inability to grasp the spiritual reality he's teaching. Jesus doesn't soften the language. Instead, he intensifies it. Unless you eat the flesh of the Son of Man and drink his blood, you have no life in you. Whoever feeds on my flesh and drinks my blood has eternal life. I will raise him up on the last day. The imagery becomes more graphic, more disturbing. He speaks of his flesh as true food, his blood as true drink, of mutual indwelling. Whoever feeds on me will live because of me. Many disciples find this teaching difficult, hard to accept. They grumble among themselves. This is a hard saying. Who can listen to it? Jesus perceives their murmuring. He asks if this offends them. Then what if they see the Son of Man ascending to where he was before? He points beyond the immediate difficulty to a greater mystery. He explains that the Spirit gives life. The flesh counts for nothing. The words he has spoken are spirit and life. But some of them don't believe. The crowd begins to fragment. This teaching proves too challenging, too strange, too much. From this time, many of his disciples turn back. They no longer walk with him. The desertion happens in Capernaum, in his own city, where he performed most of his miracles, where people saw the paralytic walk, the blind receive sight, demons cast out, they witnessed his power. Yet this teaching drives them away. Jesus turns to the 12. Do you want to leave too? Simon Peter answers for the group. Lord, to whom shall we go? You have the words of eternal life. We have believed and have come to know that you are the Holy One of God. The response shows both commitment and confusion. Peter doesn't claim to understand fully. He acknowledges they have nowhere else to turn. The words are life, even when difficult. This discourse marks a turning point in Jesus' ministry. Up to this moment, crowds followed him. People sought him out. His popularity grew. After this sermon, the tide turns. The masses begin to fall away. Opposition increases. The path toward Jerusalem and the cross becomes clearer. The location matters. Jesus delivers this hard teaching in the Capernaum synagogue, the place where he demonstrated authority, where he taught with power, where people marveled. Now that same location witnesses widespread rejection. The bread of life discourse demands something the miracle itself didn't. The feeding of the 5,000 required nothing from the recipients. They simply ate, enjoyed, were satisfied. Following that miracle took no faith, no commitment, no cost. But accepting Jesus as the bread of life, that requires trust, belief, willingness to follow even when the teaching troubles. The easy crowd disappears. Only the committed remain. The synagogue's stones absorb this confrontation. The white limestone standing today rises above the spot where Jesus divided his followers, where easy discipleship met hard truth, where those seeking free bread refused the bread of life. Capernaum's role in Jesus' ministry peaks in this moment. It serves as both the site of his greatest miracles and his most controversial teaching. The town that should have believed most readily instead provides the setting for mass apostasy. The discourse foreshadows the Last Supper. The language of eating flesh and drinking blood points forward, to broken bread and poured wine, to a sacrifice that gives life. The congregation in Capernaum can't yet grasp it. The meaning remains veiled until later events reveal it. But the teaching stands, recorded in John's Gospel, preserved for those who would later understand. The hard saying that drove the crowds away becomes the foundation for Christian worship. The scandal in the synagogue transforms into sacred mystery. Capernaum's synagogue witnessed both miracle and rejection, enthusiasm and abandonment. The town Jesus called home proved unwilling to accept his hardest truths. The bread of life discourse exposed what the miracles couldn't. Who truly believed, who followed for benefits, who would remain when the cost grew clear. The woes upon Capernaum, prophecy and judgment. Jesus pronounces judgment on 3 cities: Chorazin, Bethsaida, Capernaum, all located on the northern shore of the Sea of Galilee, all witnesses to his most powerful works, all resistant to his message. The denunciation begins with Chorazin and Bethsaida. Woe to you! If the mighty works done in you had been done in Tyre and Sidon, they would have repented long ago in sackcloth and ashes. Therefore, it will be more bearable for Tyre and Sidon on the day of judgment than for you. The comparison stings. Tyre and Sidon represent ancient Phoenician cities, Gentile strongholds, places associated with idolatry and moral corruption. Yet Jesus claims these pagan cities would have responded better to his ministry than the Jewish towns of Galilee. The principle becomes clear. Greater revelation brings greater responsibility. These Galilean villages saw miracles repeatedly. They heard teaching directly from Jesus. They had unprecedented access to truth. Their rejection, therefore, carries heavier consequences. Then Jesus turns to Capernaum, the city closest to him, his base of operations, the place he called home during his ministry, the town that witnessed more miracles than any other. And you, Capernaum, will you be exalted to heaven? You shall be brought down to Hades. The language echoes prophetic judgment against ancient Babylon. Isaiah used similar words describing that empire's fall. Jesus applies them to this fishing village. The comparison amplifies the severity. Capernaum's pride will result in complete humiliation. He continues the comparison. If the mighty works done in you had been done in Sodom, it would have remained until this day. But I tell you that it will be more tolerable on the day of judgment for the land of Sodom than for you. Sodom represents the epitome of wickedness in Jewish thought. God destroyed it with fire and sulfur. Its name became synonymous with extreme depravity. Yet Jesus declares that even Sodom would have fared better with the opportunities Capernaum received. The statement must have shocked the listeners. To be compared unfavorably with Sodom? To be told that the most notorious city in their scriptures would face less judgment? The words strike at the core of their identity. What made Capernaum's sin so severe? The town didn't actively oppose Jesus like Jerusalem would. No plot formed here to eliminate him. The people weren't overtly hostile. Their failure lay precisely in their complacency. They became familiar with miracles, accustomed to teaching. They witnessed the extraordinary and shrugged, saw the signs and remained unchanged, heard the words and continued unchanged. Capernaum treated Jesus as a local attraction, a wonder worker, a popular teacher, but not as Lord, not as the promised Messiah, not as one whose message demanded total transformation. The paralytic walked, life continued, the blind man saw, business resumed, the possessed found freedom, people returned to their routines, miracles became background noise, expected, almost boring. This indifference proved worse than active opposition. Enemies at least take their target seriously. Capernaum's citizens patronized Jesus, appreciated him, failed to recognize him. The judgment Jesus pronounces isn't immediate. He speaks of the day of judgment, a future reckoning. But he also predicts the city's earthly fate. You shall be brought down to Hades. History confirms this prophecy. Capernaum declines after the first century. The town shrinks. Eventually, it's abandoned. Later communities build over the ruins, but the original settlement disappears. Earthquakes damage the structures. Time buries them under debris. When archaeologists rediscover the site in the 19th century, they find a forgotten ruin. The White Synagogue lies in rubble. Houses collapse into piles of basalt. The town that hosted Jesus becomes a ghost, brought down indeed. The prophecy against these three cities appears in both Matthew and Luke. The repetition emphasizes its importance. Jesus didn't speak these words casually. He mourned over the town's failure, but he couldn't overlook their responsibility. The location of this pronouncement isn't specified, but the content suggests it came late in his Galilean ministry, after he had already demonstrated his power repeatedly, after the bread of life discourse drove many away. After the pattern of rejection became clear, Capernaum stands as a warning. Proximity to truth doesn't guarantee acceptance. Witnessing miracles doesn't produce faith. Being Jesus' home base meant nothing if the people didn't respond with repentance and belief. The city's judgment serves as a pattern for all places that receive and reject light, for communities that grow comfortable with God's presence without submitting to his lordship, for people who admire Jesus without following him. Modern visitors to Capernaum walk through the fulfillment of prophecy. The ruined synagogue, the excavated houses, the empty streets. The stones testify to what Jesus predicted. The city that should have been exalted lies humbled, brought down, remembered primarily for its failure. Yet even the judgment contains mercy. Jesus wept over Jerusalem. His heart broke for those who rejected him. The woes against Capernaum come from the same sorrow, a lament more than a curse, grief over wasted opportunity, mourning for those who had everything and chose nothing. The town could have been different if it had responded, if it had recognized its visitor, if it had repented when the mighty works revealed God's power. But Capernaum chose familiarity over faith, comfort over commitment, the ordinary over the extraordinary. The woes stand written, the prophecy fulfilled, the ruins remain, a testament to the danger of taking God's presence for granted, of assuming that proximity equals relationship, of mistaking exposure for transformation. Capernaum had its chance, the greatest chance any city received, and let it slip away. Life in a first-century fishing village. The sun rises over the Sea of Galilee, smoke curls from cooking fires. Fishermen drag nets along the shore. This was morning in Capernaum. The village stretched thin along the northwestern coast. Between 1,000 and 1,500 souls called this place home. Black basalt stone formed the walls of their dwellings. Earth and straw covered the roofs. No grand architecture, no paved streets. No sewage system like the great cities of Sepphoris or Tiberias possessed. What archaeologists discovered tells a story. The homes clustered in blocks called insulae. Several small rooms surrounded open courtyards. Families shared these spaces. The courtyards became centers of daily work. Women ground grain with stone mills. Children played among the basalt walls. Men repaired fishing nets in the shade. The houses reveal modest comfort. Most families lived above bare subsistence. A few enjoyed additional prosperity. Some struggled in poverty. The material culture speaks clearly. These were conservative Jews, not Hellenized, not wealthy, not desperately poor. Fishing hooks scatter the archaeological record. Net weights made of stone lie among the ruins. Basic pottery fills the excavation reports. Weaving tools, grain mills, simple lamps, the objects of working people. The Sea of Galilee gave life to Capernaum. Fish filled the waters where fresh springs met the lake. Multiple species swam there, some kosher, some not. The fishermen knew which to keep, which to discard. Cedar planks joined with mortise and tenon joints formed the fishing boats. Oak frames gave them strength. The boats measured roughly 27 feet long, 7.5 feet wide. Flat bottoms allowed them to approach shallow waters near shore. 4 rowers powered the vessel. A mast carried a square sail. 2 primary methods brought in the catch. Cast nets spread in circles over the water. Drag nets stretched between boats or along the shore. Both required skill. Both demanded strength. The work continued through the night when fish fed most actively. Processing the catch happened immediately. Some fish went to nearby Magdala for salting and smoking. The larger port controlled much of the commercial fishing. Tax collectors waited at the docks. Imperial licenses governed who could fish where. The economic reality pressed hard. Boats cost money. Nets wore out. Anchors needed replacing. Heavy taxation took its share. The multi-layered bureaucracy extracted fees at every turn. Those doing the actual fishing saw less profit than those controlling the trade. Grain supplemented the diet of fish. Wheat and barley grew in the surrounding fields. Olive oil came from nearby presses. The archaeological evidence shows 7 freshwater springs near the village. Clean water flowed abundantly. Bread formed the foundation of meals. Fish provided protein, vegetables when available, fruit in season, wine in clay vessels. The pottery assemblage reveals cooking pots and storage jars, oil lamps, simple dishes. Daily rhythms followed the sun and the Sabbath. Work filled 6 days. Rest sanctified the 7th. The synagogue stood at the heart of village life, built of black basalt, 4 feet thick at the walls. This was where Jesus taught, where he healed, where he proclaimed things the people had never heard. Social hierarchy existed, but remained relatively flat. No massive wealth gap like in the great cities. Fishermen owned their own boats or worked for those who did. Some operated as partnerships, others as hired laborers. Peter owned his own home, could pay his taxes, lived modestly above subsistence. James and John came from a family with boats and hired workers. Their resources ran deeper. The village sat on an international crossroads. The Via Maris trade route passed through. Merchants moved goods between Damascus and the Mediterranean coast. Caravans brought distant travelers. News spread quickly through this nexus. Customs officials collected tolls. A small garrison monitored the border crossing. Herod Antipas ruled to the west. Herod Philip governed to the east. Capernaum occupied the boundary between these territories. A frontier town, a place where different jurisdictions met. The rhythm of seasons governed life. Fishing varied by month and weather. Agriculture followed planting and harvest. Religious festivals marked the calendar. Pilgrims passed through on their way to Jerusalem. The village pulsed with the larger patterns of Jewish life in Galilee. Ritual baths called mikvaot served the community. Archaeological evidence confirms these. Jewish identity remained strong despite Roman occupation, despite proximity to Gentile territories, despite the pressures of the wider empire. Children grew up learning trades from their fathers. Girls learned household management from their mothers. Education happened through the synagogue for boys. Torah study, scripture memorization, preparation for religious life. Marriage happened young. Families arranged matches. Extended households shared the insulae blocks. Multiple generations lived side by side. Grandparents, parents, children, cousins. The social fabric wove tight. When sickness came, healers did what they could. When demons afflicted someone, exorcists attempted their rituals. When fever struck, families watched and waited. Hope mixed with helplessness. This was the world Jesus entered. These stones, these people, these struggles. The mundane details of fishing village life became the stage for the extraordinary, where nets and boats and basalt houses witnessed teachings that would echo through millennia, where the ordinary became the vessel for the divine, where a small town on the edge of a lake stepped into the center of history. The Jewish village in a Roman world. Capernaum existed in tension, Jewish in identity, Roman in governance. The contradiction shaped everything. Herod Antipas ruled Galilee as tetrarch, not a king, a ruler of 1/4. Client to Rome, his father Herod the Great had established the dynasty. When the great king passed, his realm divided among his sons. Antipas received Galilee and Perea. His authority came from Caesar Augustus. His power depended on Roman favor. The Tetrarch built Tiberias on the western shore of the Sea of Galilee, a capital named for the emperor, a city that displayed wealth and Hellenistic culture. But Capernaum remained distinctly different, conservative, traditionally Jewish, less influenced by the broader empire's ways. Roman presence marked the landscape even in this modest village. A milestone from the reign of Hadrian stood along the route. It commemorated improvements to the Via Maris. The international trade road brought Roman engineering, Roman administration, Roman expectations. Whether actual Roman soldiers garrisoned in Capernaum during the early 1st century remains debated among scholars. The centurion mentioned in the Gospels likely served in Herod Antipas's army. The Herodian rulers employed Gentiles in their forces, organized them along Roman military lines. A centurion commanded roughly 100 men. This officer built the local synagogue. His generosity toward the Jewish community spoke of unusual relationships across cultural lines. The small garrison monitored border traffic, watched for trouble, maintained order. Herod Antipas needed stability to keep Roman approval. Any uprising threatened his position. Any unrest invited intervention. Taxation wove through every aspect of life. Multiple layers, multiple authorities. The Roman Empire demanded tribute. Herod Antipas collected his taxes to fund his administration and building projects. The temple in Jerusalem required its half shekel. Local tolls and customs added to the burden. Tax collectors sat at their booths near the harbor. They assessed fees on fish catches, on goods passing through on the Via Maris, on commerce entering or leaving the territories. These collectors bid for the right to gather taxes. They paid the government a set amount. Whatever they collected above that became their profit. The system invited corruption. Tax collectors added fictitious values, charged excessive rates, offered loans with crushing interest when people could not pay. They formed companies to share the work and the profits. Jewish society despised them, considered them collaborators, traitors, unclean. The burden fell heavily on working people. Fishermen paid for imperial licenses, paid taxes on their catch, paid tolls to move their goods to market, paid the temple tax. The layers compounded. A significant portion of income disappeared into various treasuries. Resistance simmered beneath the surface. Judas the Galilean had risen during an earlier registration, called on his countrymen to refuse Roman taxation. The movement failed. The consequences proved brutal, but the memory lingered. The resentment festered. Yet the Jewish community in Capernaum maintained its identity. The synagogue stood as the spiritual center, not the magnificent white limestone structure visible today. That came centuries later. The original synagogue beneath sat built of black basalt, the same dark stone as the village houses. Its thick walls indicated a significant public building. Its presence declared communal priorities. Sabbath observance continued despite Roman rule. Torah study persisted. Ritual purity remained important. The mikvot served for ceremonial washing. Dietary laws governed what fish to keep, what to discard, how to prepare food. These practices marked boundaries, maintained distinctiveness. The village kept kosher even in a mixed region. No pig bones appear in the archaeological record. The pottery shows vessels appropriate for Jewish households. The material culture reflects conservative religious practice. Festivals brought pilgrims through the village. Passover, weeks, tabernacles. The great feasts drew people toward Jerusalem. Capernaum sat along one route. Travelers passed through, stayed briefly, moved on. These seasonal rhythms connected the small village to the larger story of the people. Roman roads enabled Roman control, but they also allowed Jewish movement. Information traveled along these routes. News from Jerusalem reached Galilee. Reports from one community spread to others. The network functioned despite the empire, sometimes because of it. The tension showed in language. Aramaic remained the common tongue. Hebrew appeared in religious contexts. Greek penetrated through commerce. Some needed multiple languages for trade, for dealing with authorities, for navigating the mixed population along the border region. Political maneuvering happened far away. Herod Antipas traveled to Rome, negotiated with emperors, married and divorced for advantage, built cities to curry favor, but the effects reached down to places like Capernaum. His divorce from the Nabatean king's daughter led to war. The conflict touched border regions, disrupted trade, created instability. The village existed under occupation without being militarily oppressed in the same way Judea and Samaria were after 6 AD. Those regions paid taxes directly into the imperial treasury, dealt with Roman governors, faced more direct control. Galilee maintained slightly more autonomy under its client ruler, yet the power structure remained clear. Rome stood above all. The emperor's image appeared on coins, his authority backed every local ruler. His legions waited in Syria. Any serious challenge would bring overwhelming force. Jewish faith had to negotiate this reality: how to maintain identity under foreign power, how to preserve purity while paying taxes to an unclean empire, how to worship the one true God while Caesar claimed divine honors. The questions pressed on every community, on every family, on every faithful Jew. Capernaum's position on the border added complexity. Crossing into Philip's territory meant entering a different jurisdiction, more Hellenized, more mixed population. The contrast sharpened awareness, highlighted differences, made the Jewish character of Capernaum more intentional. The synagogue represented defiance through persistence, not armed rebellion, but cultural survival, religious continuity, a statement that neither Rome nor any earthly power could claim ultimate authority. The God of Abraham, of Isaac, of Jacob. He alone ruled. He alone deserved worship. He alone would deliver his people. This was the world that heard Jesus teach, that watched him heal, that saw him challenge religious authorities and ignore social boundaries. A world caught between kingdoms, between powers, between the kingdom of Caesar and the kingdom yet to come, where stones and taxes and borders and boats became the setting for a message about a different kind of kingdom, one that Rome could not build, that Herod could not grant, that no earthly power could contain. Capernaum, after Jesus, the rise of a pilgrimage site. The disciples scattered after the ascension, but some returned. The fishing village became holy ground. By the late 1st century, something changed in one particular house. The largest room in what had been Peter's dwelling received special treatment. Workers applied plaster to the floor, a feature appearing nowhere else in Capernaum. The walls received plaster as well, carefully smoothed, prepared for something important. The pottery assemblage in this room shifted. Common household wares disappeared. Oil lamps increased, the kinds used for religious gatherings, for communal meetings. The archaeology suggests purpose, intention, transformation from domestic space to sacred space. Jewish Christians gathered here. The earliest followers, those who knew Peter, who remembered Jesus teaching in this very place, who had witnessed the healings. The room became their meeting place, a house church in the most literal sense. By the 4th century, pilgrims arriving in Capernaum asked to see Peter's house. Local Christians preserved the memory, maintained the tradition, protected the site. The entire complex became known as a domus ecclesia, a house adapted for church use. Expansion followed. The building grew to accommodate visitors. Walls enclosed the sacred area, set it apart from surrounding structures. 4th century renovations added a central arch to the venerated room, its supporting columns still visible in the archaeological record. The space opened, the ceiling lifted, room for more worshipers. Pilgrims left their mark, literally. They scratched prayers into the plastered walls. Invocations in multiple languages: Greek, Syriac, Hebrew, Latin. 124 inscriptions in Greek alone, 18 in Syriac, 15 in Hebrew, 2 in Latin. The languages tell the story. People came from everywhere. The inscriptions speak with intimate urgency. Lord Jesus Christ, help your servant. Names appear: Peter's name, appeals for mercy, pleas for healing, references to the Eucharist. One Latin inscription reads, Peter, helper of Rome. The walls absorbed centuries of desperate hope, faithful petition, remembered presence. The site's importance grew as Christianity spread. Helena, mother of Emperor Constantine, toured Palestine around 325. Locals showed her Peter's house, already revered, already known. The imperial visit added authority, recognition, resources. A Spanish pilgrim named Egeria visited 50 years later. Her diary records the journey. She wrote of the house in Capernaum, called it the house of the Prince of the Apostles, noted it had become a church. The structure she described matches what archaeologists later found: 4th century modifications. A domus ecclesia serving pilgrims. In the 5th century, the earlier building came down, demolished deliberately, buried with care. Workers used the demolition fill to create a level platform to raise the sacred ground. to prepare for something grander. They built in stone, white limestone, the same material as the new synagogue nearby, carefully carved, highly polished, brought from quarries in the Arbel region. Expensive, impressive, a statement of importance. The new structure followed an octagonal plan, a martyrium, the architectural form reserved for commemorating sacred events, sacred places, sacred people. 3 concentric octagons rose on 3 levels, each higher than the last, drawing the eye upward, drawing pilgrims toward the center. The innermost octagon measured 7.9 meters across, its walls built directly over the foundations of the 4th century Domus Ecclesia, directly above the room that had been plastered in the 1st century. The continuity deliberate, the connection preserved. Mosaics paved the floors, geometric designs, stylized flowers. The centerpiece showed a peacock, wings spread, standing in a round frame, ancient symbol. Christians interpreted it as immortality, resurrection, eternal life. The connection to Peter's house gave it deeper meaning, a reminder of healings performed here, of fever leaving Peter's mother-in-law, of the sick brought at sunset, of restoration, of hope. An apse projected from the eastern side. Inside sat a baptismal font for pilgrims, for converts, for those seeking to mark their journey with sacrament, to connect their own story to the story of this place. The outer octagon measured 16.5 meters across. An ambulatory surrounded the sacred center. Pilgrims could walk, could circle, could approach and depart in ritual pattern. The architecture created hierarchy, sacred space at the center, accessible space around it, movement and stillness, approach and reverence. This church stood for centuries, served pilgrims through the Byzantine period, welcomed travelers from across the Christian world, marked Capernaum as a destination, a place where heaven and earth had touched, where the ordinary had encountered the divine. The village itself changed. Early Arab conquest brought new rulers, new administration. But Christian presence continued for a time. The church remained, the pilgrims still came, the memory persisted. Tension grew between Jewish and Christian communities. 4th century rabbinic texts mention this. Call the Christians minim, heretics. The conflict surfaces in the sources. 2 synagogues, 2 faiths, 1 village. The coexistence strained. Earthquakes struck. 7th century, 8th century, damage accumulated, buildings collapsed, the grand white synagogue fell, the octagonal church crumbled. Reconstruction happened partially, but the glory faded. By the 11th century, the village lay abandoned. The final earthquake, the final departure, families left, commerce ceased, the stones remained. The memories buried in rubble, the site known in Arabic as Tel Hum, preserving the ancient name Kfar Nahum, village of Nahum. But the village existed no more. Centuries passed, the ruins weathered, travelers noted them, scholars speculated, but certainty faded. Where exactly had Capernaum stood? Which ruins marked which gospel stories? The questions waited until the modern age brought new tools, new methods, new commitment to uncovering what lay beneath. The archaeologists came. The excavations began. The stones started speaking again, telling their story, revealing their secrets, confirming what faith had remembered, what tradition had preserved, what the earliest Christians had known and marked and protected through the generations, that this place, these stones, this ground, here Jesus walked, here he taught, here he made Capernaum his own city, and here his followers never forgot. The archaeologist Spade, rediscovering lost Capernaum. 1838. British archaeologist Charles Wilson walked the northern shore of the Sea of Galilee. Ruins emerged from the earth, white limestone blocks, ornate carvings, too impressive to miss, too distinctive to mistake. Wilson identified the site like this was Capernaum, the synagogue visible even then. Its beauty remarkable, its preservation unusual. The identification stuck, scholars accepted it, interest grew. Decades later, the Franciscans acted, 1894. They purchased 2/3 of the site. The Greek Orthodox bought the remaining third. Ownership divided, but excavation could begin. Father Gaudenzio Orfali led early Franciscan work, 1905 through 1915. He uncovered more of the synagogue, revealed its scale, its magnificence. The white limestone contrasted sharply with the black basalt of other village structures. The findings raised questions. Dating proved difficult. The architectural style suggested late Roman period, maybe 4th or 5th century. But tradition claimed this was the synagogue from Jesus' time. The centurion's gift, the place where Jesus taught. Excavation continued under the synagogue floor. Black basalt foundations appeared. Older, different possibilities emerged. Perhaps two synagogues, one built atop the other, the limestone structure commemorating an earlier basalt building, the earlier one potentially first century, potentially the synagogue of the Gospels. The excavations paused, world events intervened, decades passed, the site waited. The Franciscans maintained the property, prepared for eventual return. 1968. Father Virgilio Corbo and Father Stanislao Lafreda resumed excavations. 18 campaigns over 17 years. The work intensified, the discoveries multiplied, the picture clarified. They focused east of the synagogue, between the worship building and the lake, an area showing unusual features, an enclosed space, walls surrounding specific structures, the insula sacra, holy island. Within days they found painted plaster, fragments bearing inscriptions, Greek letters, Aramaic, Syriac, Latin, Christian symbols, invocations to Christ, references to Peter. The pieces told a story. This had been sacred to early Christians, marked, preserved, venerated. Beneath a 5th century octagonal church, they found a 4th century domus ecclesia. Beneath that, a 1st century house with special modifications. One room plastered, set apart, the layers stacked like pages in a book, each era building on what came before, each generation preserving the memory. The chronology grew clear. 1st century dwelling, late 1st century modification, 4th century expansion, 5th century monumentalization. The progression made sense, the evidence aligned, the tradition confirmed. Other parts of the village revealed themselves, the typical insula blocks, houses clustered around courtyards, black basalt walls, earth and straw roofs, the material culture of working people, fishing hooks, net weights, simple pottery, grain mills, weaving tools. The residential area painted a picture: modest prosperity, traditional Jewish life, conservative culture, estimated population between 1,000 and 1,500. The archaeology matched the historical sources. The stones spoke what the texts recorded. The Greek Orthodox section received less excavation. Father Vasilios Tsafaris surveyed and partially excavated the eastern portion. Byzantine period structures appeared. A pool for processing fish, a hoard of gold coins, evidence of later prosperity, the site flourishing in new ways. The harbor facilities emerged along the shore, modest, nothing like the grand ports at Magdala or Tiberias, simple basalt jetties, stacked fieldstones, enough for local fishing boats, for small-scale commerce, for the village's needs. The Jesus boat discovery happened separately but connected to the story. 1986, brothers Moshe and Yuval Lufan walked the exposed shoreline near Capernaum. Drought had lowered the lake's water level. Mud revealed outlines. A boat, 1st century, cedar and oak, mortise and tenon construction, the type that would have worked these waters when Jesus called fishermen. Excavating the boat proved challenging. 12 days and nights, racing against rising water, protecting fragile waterlogged wood, wrapping it in fiberglass and foam, moving it to safety. Then 7 years submerged in chemical bath. Preservation, protection, preparation for display. The boat now rests in the Yigal Allon Museum at Kibbutz Ginosar. 27 feet long, 7.5 feet wide, room for 15 people or 5 crew and a ton of fish. No evidence links this specific vessel to Jesus or his disciples, but it shows what such boats looked like, how they worked, what the gospel accounts described. Back at Capernaum, the excavations continued, revealing pottery shards dated layers, coins provided chronology, architectural analysis suggested construction phases. Comparative studies connected Capernaum to broader patterns in Galilean villages. The synagogue's dating became clearer. The white limestone structure belonged to the late 4th or 5th century, based on pottery. Coins, stylistic comparisons. The basalt structure beneath showed 1st century characteristics. Black basalt walls, 4 feet thick. Foundation and floor suggesting earlier construction. The excavators couldn't dig deeper without dismantling the later synagogue. The question remained partially unanswered, but the evidence pointed strongly. 2 synagogues, the magnificent one visible, the humble one beneath, the gospel one likely below, where Jesus actually taught. Modern technology added tools, ground-penetrating radar, photogrammetry, 3-dimensional mapping. The methods evolved, the precision increased, the picture sharpened. Conservation became crucial, protecting exposed stones from weathering, stabilizing ancient walls, managing tourist traffic, balancing access with preservation. The Franciscans built the modern church over Peter's house. Controversial design, looking somewhat like a spaceship, but protecting the ruins beneath. Allowing viewing through glass floor, solving the problem of display and preservation. The findings published slowly, technical reports, academic journals, synthesis volumes. Corbo and Lafreda produced detailed studies. Other scholars examined the evidence, debated conclusions, refined interpretations. Gradually, the archaeological picture confirmed the biblical narrative. A fishing village on the northwestern shore, a basalt synagogue from the 1st century. A house venerated as Peter's from the earliest Christian period, the material evidence supporting the textual tradition, the site became pilgrimage destination again. Christians visiting the Holy Land include Capernaum, walk where Jesus walked, stand where he taught, see the stones that witnessed his ministry. The archaeology enables imagination, grounds faith in physical reality. The work continues. New questions emerge, new techniques develop. Each season potentially reveals more. The soil holds secrets still. The stones wait to speak. The past remains partially buried, waiting for the archaeologist's careful hand. The patient excavation, the interpretive skill that connects fragment to story, potsherd to history, foundation to faith, the spade that uncovers, the scholarship that explains, the dedication that preserves, making the ancient present, the buried visible, the forgotten remembered, so that Capernaum lives again, not as a functioning village, but as a witness to what was, to what happened, to the moments when eternity touched time. And a small fishing village became the stage for the greatest story ever told. The enduring legacy, stones that still speak silence, now fills the courtyards where children played. Basalt walls stand roofless, limestone columns rise without ceilings, yet something in Capernaum still speaks. The village is gone, but the memory endures. Matthew called it his own city. Jesus left Nazareth, chose Capernaum, and from that decision, the geography of his ministry shifted forever. This border town sat on the Via Maris, a crossroads of cultures, occupations, and empires. Fishermen, merchants, soldiers, tax collectors, all passed through its gates. Jesus chose the intersection, the meeting point of worlds. Here he called his first disciples. Ordinary fishermen dropped nets, stepped out of boats, and stepped into history. Here he taught with authority that startled listeners and unsettled leaders. In the synagogue, his words broke patterns. Demons cried out, people marveled. Here miracles clustered more densely than anywhere else. Peter's mother-in-law healed, the paralytic lowered through the roof, the centurion's servant restored, the demoniac freed, the woman with the hemorrhage made whole. Capernaum became a concentrated demonstration of the kingdom's nearness. Here hard teachings divided the crowds. After the bread of life discourse, many walked away. But Peter stayed, speaking for the 12. Where else can we go? You have the words of eternal life. Here judgment was pronounced. Woe to you, Capernaum! Witness without response, blessing without repentance. Even Sodom would have turned, Jesus said. The warning still echoes. Proximity is not transformation. History fulfilled the prophecy. The town thrived into the Byzantine era, but earthquakes, empire shifts, and decline followed. Eventually it was abandoned, Telhum marking the silent remains. Yet its legacy became more than ruins, it became symbol. A symbol of calling, ordinary people chosen for extraordinary purpose. A model of ministry, teaching and healing, word and deed side by side. A warning, miracles mean nothing if hearts remain unchanged. A promise, grace reaches the unlikely, the compromised, the overlooked. Archaeology roots faith in real soil. These are not floating legends. The stones exist. Foundations of the synagogue, the remains of Peter's house, the village layout, tools of fishermen, layers of occupation showing a 1st century home, a house church, then a 5th century shrine. Generations mark this place as sacred. Inscriptions whisper prayers. Pilgrims scratched names into plaster. Believers left marks of faith, hope, and remembrance. The stones record human longing. Modern visitors walk the same shoreline, stand where Jesus stood, imagine the crowds, the teachings, the healings. The site itself becomes a teacher, the ruins enabling the encounter, the physical location anchoring spiritual imagination. Scholars keep uncovering details. New techniques reveal what earlier excavations missed. The dialogue between text and archaeology continues, sharpening our picture of the world Jesus moved through. Capernaum teaches through what remains and what doesn't. The great synagogue survives, the humble dwellings crumble. We see the monumental and must imagine the ordinary. a reminder that Jesus spent more time in fishermen's homes than in impressive structures. Capernaum sits on the margins, not Jerusalem, not Rome, a frontier town, proving again that God often works in overlooked places. From here, the message traveled the trade routes. Travelers carried stories of a rabbi who healed with a word and spoke with unprecedented authority. The stones still testify, silent sermon, wordless witness. They declare that something world-changing happened here. Capernaum's legacy lives in every small place God uses, every ordinary setting touched by the extraordinary. It invites us to remember that the infinite appear in the insignificant, that fishermen can become apostles, that villages can become holy ground, that stones can speak truth across millennia. Capernaum, the town Jesus called home, where nets were dropped and lives were remade, where bread multiplied and the bread of life taught, where demons fled and the kingdom drew near, where some believed and some refused, where judgment was spoken and memory preserved, where stones still echo the moment heaven touched earth, and nothing was ever the same.